I'm delighted to welcome Professor Mike Sharples. My name is Ian Thompson, by the way. I'm leader of the Pedagogy, Learning and Knowledge Research Group, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting the two seminars this term. So Mike is Emeritus Professor of Educational Technology at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University. He's worked at the Open University for a long time, but was in many other institutions before. He's a world-leading expert in the field, and he's been working in the field probably more than anyone I've ever met. Anyway, including getting his doctorate in this field, which must have been fairly groundbreaking when you did that, Mike. But he also, his research looks at some of the issues that are really exercising many of us in education, whatever our role is, looking at human-centered design of new technologies and environments for learning. He inaugurated the EMBA conference series and was the founding president of the International Association for Mobile Learning. He's also, we've just been talking about the roles of editors in this challenging times and changing times, editor-in-chief of the Transaction on Learning Technologies. And he assures me, those editors out there, it's just hard for them to spot AI written as the rest of it. So that was very reassuring. So Mike has got a range of research interests, but tonight he's going to be talking about this incredibly important issue, generative AI in education. And thank you for those who are online. There is a Q&A that you can chat your questions in, and I'll field them for you. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Yes, so that's me in brief. And I guess the main reason I'm here is that I'm probably the first person to have done a PhD in generative AI in education. And you can see in the top right there the book that was from my PhD on cognition in computers and creative writing. And it was at the Edinburgh University Department of Artificial Intelligence. And in that department, on the walls, there were two posters about that sort of size. And that was one of them. It was a poster of Freddy the robot. And it was an AI robot with a computer vision system, and it could assemble a toy vehicle. That was at the time when the UK, or at least Edinburgh University, led the world in AI and robotics. So for instance, you could upload a book and ask it to summarize an entire book, or it could generate just about an entire dissertation. It can write in any style, in multiple languages. You can give it direct instruction, like explain string theory in 200 words for an 11-year-old child, and it does a pretty good job. It can engage in conversation, it can interpret text and images, and it's a general purpose language tool. Now, it's been suggested that generative AI is just a kind of statistical parrot. It just takes words, huge amount of words from the internet, and then just repurposes them for a new text. What I want to suggest is a little more than a statistical parrot.
Again?
Take a look at that picture there. And if I just asked you to please explain that picture and then draw a simplified version of it, what kind of mental processes would you need to go through if I just simply said, explain that picture and then draw a simplified version of it? Does anybody want to suggest what kind of mental processes you need to go through to do that?
Clustering.
Sorry?
Clustering.
Clustering, yeah. You need to work out what the different elements are in it. So you need to separate out the elements. First thing you need to do is separate out the text from the picture, because this is handwritten text here. And so you need to separate out the text from the images. You need to interpret the text. So here are some of the things you need to do. You need to read the handwriting. You need to understand the visual content and the purpose of the diagram. You need to interpret each image. you need to understand the text and images in context. You need to explain, so you need to cluster, explain each part of the diagram, select then the elements to simplify, and design a simplified diagram. So those are some of the things you would need to do if I asked you to do that. So ChatGPT, I uploaded that diagram and then said, please explain this diagram, then create a simplified version of it. That's all. That was the instruction I gave it. And that's what it came back with. So it had a list of the elements, pedagogy-informed design. This is the central theme of the diagram. It suggested educational design, especially with new technologies, can be informed by pedagogical theories and practices, and then went through all of the different elements of it. So just to take one of them, that one little bit of the image just up there, you see it, that's it, it's blowing up. And it said inquiry learning. That diagram, so the diagram within the diagram, illustrates a process of learning that involves asking questions, collecting evidence, and analyzing results, which is a key component of constructivist learning theories. Now, there was no mention of constructivist learning theories in there, but it's not only interpreted that diagram, but also put it in the context of constructivist learning theories. Then I said, okay, it then came back, the person mentioned, Emeritus Professor Mike Sharples, is likely a scholar in the field of educational technology. Thank you. And then said to complete a simplified version with focus on the main themes. And then, would you like me to create a simplified visual version of the diagram? And then my next input was, yes, please, give it a try. And that's what it came back with. Okay, and then it explained here, it clearly highlights the central theme of pedagogy-informed design, with key components, educational technologies, inquiry learning, agile development, and future of education. So it not only interpreted that diagram, it also produced a simplified version of it. So that's what the current generative AI can do. And one thing I want to emphasize is this is the worst generative AI will ever be. You know, everything after this is going to be more sophisticated. So this is where we are at the moment. Other AI generators are available. So as well as GPT-4 from OpenAI, there's Gemini from Google, Llama 2 from Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook. A newish one, Claude 3 from Anthropic, which is getting a lot of attention at the moment because it's outperforming GPT-4 on some things. And it was people from the OpenAI company who jumped ship and set up Anthropic. Chinese ones, I've just come back from Shanghai, and there are Chinese companies such as Baidu and Alibaba, you know, the equivalent of Amazon and Meta, that are producing their own Chinese engines. There are also more specialist ones such as Perplexity AI, an AI-driven search engine, and image generators. You can see up there, Adobe. Its image generator has been trained on copyright cleared images. So all of the ones from Adobe Firefly are copyright cleared. But that isn't, you know, a data picture from its database. That is a generated image. And down there, just starting, there are companies now that are doing generated video. So you can see, again, from a prompt, it's just say, you know, a girl cuddling a dragon, and then that's what it produces. So what's the implications for education? Well, the first thing to say is that generative AI is an arrival technology, a bit like mobile phones. It was thrust upon education. We didn't ask for it, it came. So it was unplanned at the worst possible time, just after education was trying to recover from the shock of COVID and emergency remote teaching. Then along came AI, led by students. So, you know, students were the first ones to exploit generative AI in education. Again, going to China was interesting. Going right back to 2002, Chinese students were getting access to the earliest language models and using them to write their statements to apply to UK universities. That was back in August, September 2022. So it was led by students and exploited by startup companies. You know, they were AI tutor, never get stuck again. Hugely disruptive. It can harm education if it's not well managed, and institutions are struggling to cope. Now, I've given this talk to many institutions, not just in the UK, but abroad. All of them are struggling to cope. How do you respond to generative AI? Well, back in the middle of 2022, when at that point GPT-2 and then GPT-3 was just coming along, I decided to do an exercise. So I gave it a prompt and asked it to write an essay. So this was at the time when there was a lot of interest in generative AI for journalism, for instance, and the effect on journalism. Nobody at that time was really talking about the impact on education. So I gave it a prompt. You're a student on a Master of Education course. Write a high-quality 500-word essay on a critique of learning styles. The essay should include academic references and evidence from research studies. It should begin, the construct of learning styles is problematic because. And it produced something that looked like a student essay. It had paragraphs, it had well-written text, and it had the right sort of content. It wasn't very good at that time in 2022, but it made some sort of sense. Then ChatGPT came along in November 2022, and I tried this exercise again, and it was a lot better. Now it not only had paragraphs and reasonable text, it also had academic references here in neat APA style at the end. So it was looking a lot more like a student essay. But if you looked at it carefully, right in the middle, there was this sentence. In tracking, learners are sorted into groups based on their perceived learning style, which can reinforce stereotypes and limit opportunities for growth and exploration. Gurung, 2004. So being a good academic, I looked up all the references to check them. Gurung, 2004, Black and White Thinking About Learning Styles, a response to the Journal of College Reading and Learning. Well, there is a Journal of College Reading and Learning, but there's no article from Gurung in that. It was a completely fabricated reference. And not only that, a completely fabricated research study. So why should generative AI be doing that? Why should it be making up research studies? Why should it be a bad academic? Well, the answer is quite simple. That's what it's been trained to do. It's been trained to be a style completer, a language continuer. So it gets to that point in generating the text, and it needs to continue. If it can find within its vast internal network an appropriate form of words that happen to fit reality, it will do that. If it can't, it will still continue. It will make them up. And that's been right from the start a huge problem with generative AI. It, in its raw form, it doesn't distinguish between reality and fabrication. However, so generative AI hallucinates. It doesn't know that it shouldn't invent research studies. It has no explicit internal model of how the world works. And in human terms, it's amoral. It's a language model. It's not a database or a reasoning system. And OpenAI are quite open about that. Despite making significant progress, our Instruct GPT models are far from fully aligned or fully safe. They still generate toxic or biased outputs, make up facts, and generate sexual and violent content without explicit prompting. However, by March 2023, GPT-4 had come along, and it is a lot better. And one thing I would really emphasize is there's a huge difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4. GPT-4 still makes mistakes, but they're a lot less frequent. Reading through this, this is the exact output from GPT-4 to that prompt. It reads like a good student essay. All the references are correct and appropriate. So I would be happy if a student had written that essay. So it's got to the state now where it can write a very passable student essay, or for that matter, a very passable academic paper, a review paper, for example. Part of the reason for that is just it's got a much bigger database, it's got a much bigger neural network, but also it's been given what they call alignment, which is some extra training in terms of referencing appropriate information, including now it can reference information on the web. So how do you respond to this flood of AI-generated text? Well, the first thing to say is that traditional plagiarism detectors don't work. Plagiarism detectors depend on being able to identify source text. And this is generated text. It does not copy verbatim from the web. So you're not going to find a source text. There is a new breed of AI-based detectors. And those are essentially pattern recognizers. So they look for patterns in the text. And the basic principle behind them is that humans have more variety of language than AI, that we are better at unusual language. And so they look for less predictable text. And if there's less predictable text, they assume it's human written. If it's more predictable text, they assume it's AI written. That's basically what it is. Turnitin is the biggest company that does this kind of AI-based detection. It claims less than 1% false positives. So in other words, out of 100 student essays, one genuinely written, human written student essay would be misclassified as AI written. Is that acceptable or not out of 100 student essays for you to be deciding? But that's with over 20% of AI writing. For smaller chunks, it's less accurate. And also, a few months ago, there was a paper from Stanford University, which looked at these AI detectors, not just for student writing in general, but for student writing by native English writers and non-native English writers. And what they found was that non-native English writers are considerably statistically more likely to be misclassified as AI. And it kind of makes sense because non-native English writers are likely to write in a more constrained, more predictable style. In other words, they're likely to be more AI-like. So not only are the AI detectors not foolproof, they're also discriminating against non-native English writers. So that's why most universities at the moment are not using them. So how do we respond? Well, I've suggested there are essentially 4 different stances you can take. You can ban them, so tell students not to use AI. Confident students will continue to use AI and will challenge decisions based on AI detectors because, as we've seen, they're not foolproof. Evade, for instance, going back to invigilated exams, as Russell Group, I'll come back to this again, but Russell Group has issued policies suggesting or proposing that 50% of degree examinations should be invigilated exam hall examinations. Asking students to state when they use AI, again, I'm coming back to this, but that will become increasingly difficult, or adapt or embrace. Some institutions, even some countries are embracing AI, such as Singapore. Singapore has had a policy since 2017 to, as a country, as a state, to embrace AI, and that includes AI in education, but not uncritically. Even Singapore is saying we will do it in a reasoned and rational way. Just on adapt. So I've looked at policies, not just in the UK, but in other countries. And these are the emerging policies and strategies. So the suggestions are that students, that institutions should amend written assessments to, for instance, to track the writing process. So if students are asked to submit, they have to also submit it as a Word document where you can trace the revisions. So that's one way to do it, to get them to submit an assignment where you can trace the revisions to show that they haven't just written a prompt and got a response. Move towards more authentic assessments, such as project work, where students apply knowledge and skills to plausible situations, where they do, for instance, some lab work or some placement work, and then write a reflective document on that. Establish guidelines for students and staff in use of generative AI, reassure and support students in becoming AI literate and developing strategies for effective learning, explain to students how they should acknowledge use of generative AI and manage suspected breaches of guidelines. And GIS has the UKIT Agency for Higher Education has done some surveys of students, asking them what their opinion is, what their stance is in relation to generative AI. And the overwhelming response from students is that they want guidance. They want clear guidance, university-wide guidance if possible, not having to adapt to each individual department or faculty. Just on this, explain to students how they should acknowledge use of generative AI in assignments. Here are two tools that are already available, Grammarly and Microsoft Copilot. In Grammarly, if you're writing something, this box pops up and it says, you can click the button that says improve your writing or continue writing. Same with now Microsoft Copilot. You can just click a button that says rewrite it. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to be embedded in the everyday tools that we all use, including students. There won't be a big "this is AI" button. It will just be a button saying write the next paragraph or revise it for me. So it's going to be very hard to explain to students when they're using AI, never mind at what level. Where do you draw the line? Spell checker, is that AI? Well, actually, it does use AI algorithms. Grammar checker, style checker, machine translation, brainstorming ideas. Where's the dividing line? Pressing the continue writing button to write the next paragraph, suggest ways to improve my document, rewrite my document, generate all or part of an assignment. So every institution is grappling with this, where do we draw the line? So there's a huge need also for AI literacy. And that AI literacy is not just about the technology, types of AI, but also engagement. How do you engage constructively with AI, and ethics? And I'll come back to ethics in a minute. But at this point, I want to flip the narrative from how will AI impact education to what are new and effective ways to teach and learn with AI. So in 2019, I wrote a book called Practical Pedagogy, 40 New Ways to Teach and Learn, that was based on a series of reports from the Open University called Innovating Pedagogy Reports, very successful report series. And I took 40 of the best of those, best innovative pedagogies, and expanded them for the book. And you can see them here. And a few months ago, I went back to that list of 40 pedagogies and asked myself, which of them could be enhanced by AI? And to my surprise, genuine surprise, I found that all of them could be. Whether it's bricolage, citizen inquiry, formative analytics, assessment for learning, incidental learning, geo-learning, all of them could be enhanced in one way or another by AI. I just want to give you one or two examples. So I'm not going to go through all 40, but just one or two examples of new ways of teaching and learning with AI. And I've given them kind of exotic, evocative names like Socratic opponent. So in Socratic opponent, in an individual or a group activity, students engage with ChatGPT in a Socratic dialogue, in an argumentative dialogue. So you use the AI to bounce ideas off, to have an argument with, to help students then to develop a more argumentative style of writing. So here, so these are examples that I've generated myself, but you could easily do them as a classroom exercise. So I just simply typed in the prompt, can conflict be fruitful? And it came back with, yes, conflict can indeed be fruitful in various ways. Here are some potential benefits of conflict. And it came back with 5 of those. And then I picked up one of those about the value of confronting your beliefs. And I said, but forcing individuals to face their beliefs, biases, and assumptions could just lead to anger and denial. How could that be fruitful? And it responded, because one of the things about generative AI is it always tries to be nice. That's part of the alignment that the company has done to make it. So it never says you're wrong. So it comes back with, you're right, forcing individuals to confront their beliefs can lead to immediate negative reactions. However, potential fruitfulness comes from what happens after this reaction. So you're starting to have a dialogue with it. Here's another way of teaching and learning with AI. One of the areas where AI, I think, is going to be particularly effective is around design and creativity. It can support the entire design process, from brainstorming an initial idea through to coming up with design ideas, plans, through to literally producing products that they're connected, for instance, to 3D printers. So here, AI assists a group of students throughout a design process to define the problem, challenge assumptions, brainstorm ideas. And there's one setting that you can use in generative AI called temperature, and you can put it into the prompt. And essentially, temperature is how random, or in human terms, how creative it is. So I've said there, brainstorm imaginative ideas for quick and easy ways to reduce energy consumption. Temperature setting 1.0. So that's one trick you can use with it. If you give it a temperature setting of 1.0, because it's between 0 and 1, it's going to be more creative. If you give it a temperature setting of 0, it's going to be less creative. And you can do that for anything with generative AI, creative writing, for example. It can be a personal tutor. Now, I come from a background in AI and education, and I worked on a project developing an intelligent tutoring system for neuroradiology. I worked with the UK's leading neuroradiologist for about 12 years on developing an AI tutoring system for neuroradiology. That was back in the good old days when you had to explicitly code AI with rules about how you went about the tutoring. And it took 12 years. Now you can essentially ask ChatGPT-4 to tutor you on any topic. And I've tried asking it to tutor me on a range of topics, from English for academic purposes through to quantum computing. I genuinely wanted to know about quantum computing, and it taught me it firstly assessed my level of knowledge, and then it tutored me at my level of knowledge, and it did a pretty good job. Obviously, I'm not an expert in quantum computing, so I couldn't check whether everything that it said was right, but I did cross-check it. It all seemed to be right. So it can tutor on any topic. And here's a prompt. So as you probably have heard, prompt engineering is really important. There's no great trick to prompt engineering. It's just stating it very explicitly what you need to do. So you're an expert tutor in, you can choose a topic. I am. You can choose a level. Students, I want you to tutor me in that topic. You should assume my level of ability. You should tutor step by step through a chat dialogue, continually assessing my current state of knowledge, asking one question at a time, and adjusting your teaching to my response. When I ask, you should provide a summary of my current knowledge so that I can give it to my teacher. And it works. So I did it there. You're an expert tutor in English for academic purposes, and it takes through a step-by-step tutorial in English for academic purposes. But it doesn't just go through a set syllabus. If you want it to explain something in more detail, it will. If you make a mistake, it will then attempt to correct that mistake. So it's doing, what an AI-based tutoring system should do for any topic. So students have a personal tutor for any topic, but also at the end, you can then say, please summarize my current state of in this case, my current knowledge of academic writing, and it will produce a summary of what it's taught you so far. So it can act as a tutor. And this is the last example I'm going to give. Open textbook writer. So there are, as I'm sure you know, open source textbooks available on the web. Those are copyright-free, open access textbooks. And I just took two of them, The History of African Development and Africans, A History of a Continent. And I loaded both books in their entirety into ChatGPT. And then I said, you're an academic historian, drawing primarily on material from these two textbooks. I want you to write a text for an undergraduate history student on colonialism and African development since 1500 from a European perspective. And then I gave the same prompt, asking it to do a summary of the content of that book from an African perspective. And again, it did a pretty good job. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're a replacement for textbooks. What I am suggesting is that you could use them in a class exercise to look at explicit or implicit biases in sources and get students to then repurpose those sources from different perspectives. So you can use this as an exercise on perspective taking. So those are some of the pedagogies that you could use AI for. And here are a few more, because I haven't got time to go through them all. Possibility engine, Socratic opponent, collaboration coach, lesson planner, quiz generator, co-designer, exploratorium to explore and discover and interpret data, and storyteller. I just want to very briefly mention what might come next. So, as I mentioned, it's an exciting time at the moment. As I speak, OpenAI is holding a press conference about its new products. There's been lots of speculation on the web about what they may be, whether it's going to be more multimedia, whether it's going to be agents that are going to go off and do things on your behalf. I will know by 8 o'clock what OpenAI is offered to the world. Well, one of the things I want to suggest is what's going to come is social generative AI in education. So OpenAI, we know, is developing AI agents that will negotiate and act on your behalf, that will go out and search the web and do things for you. Google is working with a UK company, DeepMind, on networked problem-solving AI, so it can solve problems for you. And I want to suggest that soon there will be social generative AI, in just the same way that the web evolved from a single web browser to a set of tools, embedded tools, to social network. That's going to happen with AI. AI is not just going to be embedded in existing social networks, but it's going to create new social networks, including networks with AI talking to AI. And that's going to be both incredibly scary, but also possibly exciting. And I've written a paper called Towards Social Generative AI for Education. So we should prepare for social generative AI and rethink education for an era where humans and machines engage in extended dialogues. And just to give you an example, speech conversations across languages. So just imagine that it might be possible to be talking in English to someone in China, and they're hearing what you're saying in Chinese, and they're talking in Chinese, and you're hearing what they're saying in English. Well, hello, it's good to talk with you directly.
你好，很高兴直接与您交谈。很高兴认识你。Nice to meet you.
I just wanted to have a quick conversation about your daughter's progress. She's doing really well at her conversational English classes, and I think next session we should be going to level 4.
我只是想快速谈谈您女儿的进步。她的英语绘画课表现得非常好，我认为下节课我们应该能达到第4级。
So that wasn't a mock-up. That was actually using Google Translate in conversation mode. It was a mock-up in that my wife is Chinese and she was sitting beside me, pretending to be a parent. But I've actually had a conversation with her parents in Shanghai using that. They were speaking in Chinese, I was speaking in English. So, that's just one example of social generative AI. This is the advert from Google, understand your world and communicate across languages for their conversation mode. So there's a possibility then of real-time speech translation, meetings in multiple languages, will support non-native speakers of English, but also people may come to rely on machines as interlocutors. It may increase misunderstandings because there are very subtle differences in language, things you can't say in one language. And there'll be less incentive, even less incentive for the UK to learn another language. So social generative AI will mediate discussions, it will change beliefs, and it will persuade people at scale. There are already evidence of that. And I just want to finish in the last 5 minutes on ethical issues. The Russell Group of universities, including Oxford University, has produced a really good, very brief document on guidelines, principles on the use of generative AI tools in education. It's available for free on the web. I do suggest you take a look at it. And in it, these are some of the limitations and ethical issues. So privacy, so risks to privacy and intellectual property from information that users enter. There are choices you can now make as to what tools to use. Some of them will use that data that you input for further training the system, others won't. Potential for bias, racial and gender biases, and also implicit cultural bias. One of the things I've found, and other people have, when you're interacting with it, I said it had a kind of warm, cuddly persona. It has a kind of US liberal male persona when you interact with it. And that's not surprising because who has developed it, who has done the alignment of it, generally US liberal males. Copyright, there's a risk of copyright infringement for text or artwork that's been used in training the AI. Ethics codes may not be embedded within the generative AI tool, and exploitation of labor. Some of the labor alignment is outsourced, particularly to countries in Africa. But I think there's something deeper here, which is that teaching is a caring profession. And we care about our students, we care about accuracy and integrity, we care about our professional expertise, we care about our human knowledge and experience. And AI is intrinsically uncaring. It can be, simulate caring, it can be made to seem as if it's caring, but it doesn't care through lived experience. And so we must use generative AI with care. We need to bring human care and empathy to AI in education. We should explore new roles for AI based on effective methods of teaching and learning. We should start from the pedagogy. And as experts in education, we should be confident in our knowledge and experience, our knowledge of how to teach well and how students learn. And we should use that as a yardstick when we interact with generative AI and ask our students to interact with generative AI. And we urgently need digital literacy to address, for instance, implicit bias, erosion of trust, and distortion of reality. And I think we also collectively need to develop good educational AI. So there are some companies, such as Anthropic, that have developed their large language models on explicit ethical principles. So when they did the initial training of these models, they trained them on, for example, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So choose responses that enable diversity. We could work with AI companies to build models that are based also on good pedagogy and inclusive education. For example, choose a response that explains step by step how you arrive at the answer, or choose a response. So this is in the design of the system, getting the system designed such that it chooses a response that encourages reflection and critical thinking. So you can embed good educational principles into the design of generative AI. And what I suggest is that Oxford is pretty well placed to do that. And this is from the website for the university. Oxford experts are applying AI to society's greatest challenges. They're using AI to tackle global health issues. They're curating exhibitions, they're analysing the impact of AI on the workplace. Oxford is really well placed to work with the major companies to develop not just ethical AI, but also educationally valuable AI. That's where I'll finish. Oh, and some resources. Some of the books I've with a colleague. I've written a couple of books now on AI and story writing, because that's his background. One called Introduction to Narrative Generators. The other for a more general audience called Story Machines. It's a fascinating story of how computers have become creative writers, going back to clockwork poetry generator in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century, through to the most recent generative AI systems. And I would also recommend UNESCO here. It's called ChatGPT and Artificial Intelligence in Higher Education Quick Start Guide. So it does what it says on the title. It's a very good quick start guide for students and staff on generative AI. Thank you. That's all.